He hunted where his victims felt safe. Both night and day, he struck coldly and relentlessly. Why did this serial criminal target only elderly women? All law enforcement agencies were on his trail, while ordinary citizens formed night patrols. Who was the masked serial maniac terrorizing an entire city? Balakovo, a small industrial hub on the Volga River, is home to Russia's largest nuclear power plant. This plant not only powers numerous factories, auto plants, and mills in the Saratov region, but also produces 1/5 of the country's nuclear energy. It's the only Russian city where nuclear, thermal, and hydroelectric power stations are all located in one place. The residents here are tough. Workers, energy specialists, and builders. Yet for several months, even these resilient people were on edge because of one individual. Late one evening, a bus stopped at one of Balakovo's residential areas. An elderly woman leisurely stepped off. The streets were dimly lit and not crowded, but her house was just a couple of blocks away. She knew every nook and cranny of the area. Clutching a cheap bag with personal items, modestly dressed, without any expensive jewelry or a cell phone, she wouldn't have caught anyone's eye. Except one person. He'd been waiting for over half an hour, ensuring he wasn't noticed by the few passers-by. Nina Petrovna Katanenkova, the victim's neighbor, was about to go to bed when she heard a piercing scream. Looking out the window, she saw a man running away. She rushed to help. The victim couldn't describe the attacker's face. Everything was a blur. Some young man had suddenly attacked her from behind with a brick. Neighbors quickly called an ambulance and the police. It seemed like a typical mugging. The unknown assailant waited until the lonely woman approached her building and then struck, snatching her bag before running off. By the time the police arrived, the injured woman was already on her way to the hospital. Her daughter provided the details. According to her, her mother was returning from work at 9:30 p.m. when an unknown man attacked her near their building, stealing her belongings, documents, and money. Investigators found it odd that the thief didn't threaten, but instead immediately started hitting her. Initially, detectives suspected domestic violence might be the cause of her injuries. However, this attack was just the beginning of a bloody series. Less than 20 hours later, another elderly woman from the other end of the city called emergency services. She was extremely nervous, saying her neighbor had been attacked and they urgently needed an ambulance. The stairwell was covered in blood. This happened in broad daylight. Valentina Nikolaevna heard strange noises on the landing and thought her granddaughter was playing around. She went to check and heard terrifying screams from the elevator. "Help! Call an ambulance!" While waiting for rescuers, the victim recounted a bizarre story. A stranger had caught up with her near the entrance. She was wary and refused to ride the elevator with him, letting him go ahead. She waited until the elevator was free and pressed the button for the 6th floor. When the doors opened, the same man was standing there. Without a word, he stabbed her several times in the neck, grabbed her bag, and fled. The story repeated itself 2 days later. In another residential building, someone attacked an elderly woman in the elevator, again wielding a knife. But this time, the woman resisted, biting the attacker, causing him to drop the knife. The knife wasn't from a hunting store or a kitchen. It was an unusual, custom-made cleaver with a handle wrapped in thin wire, indicating the attacker's meticulous planning. Despite resembling a typical robbery, several factors puzzled the investigators. Firstly, the victims couldn't accurately describe the man. One said he was 25, another said 40. One described him as gray-haired, another as having light hair. His behavior was erratic, and he immediately resorted to stabbing in the elevator. Checking the criminal records yielded no results. The victims couldn't identify anyone. The attacker left no fingerprints on the knife. However, the stolen items were quickly found. The attacker discarded the victim's belongings, including cell phones, keeping only gold items and money. He was smart. never taking anything that could lead back to him. Moreover, he had a distinct pattern. All the victims were elderly women of similar age and build, none possessing large sums of money or expensive jewelry. Investigators created a profile. A man of Slavic appearance, medium build, short, with light hair. Every second person could fall under suspicion due to these signs. It seemed someone was trying to disguise crimes of a different nature as mere robberies. Rumors of a serial killer began to spread across the city. His targets were exclusively middle-aged women, and he always attacked in elevators or stairwells, earning him the nickname, the Elevator Man. Frightened citizens exchanged gruesome details of the alleged murders. The city stood still. Women were scared to step outside alone, only doing so under the escort of men. The Balakovo Elevator Man wasn't the first to attack in residential buildings. In 2009, detectives in St. Petersburg caught a serial pedophile. He had eluded the best criminal investigators for nearly 8 years. The man, known as the Elevator Man, always managed to slip away just when they were closing in. Since 2001, he had been attacking children in building entrances, assaulting them, and then vanishing. Despite multiple sightings by law enforcement, he would go underground whenever he sensed capture was imminent. It was only a few years ago that he was finally apprehended. The perpetrator was a seemingly normal 37-year-old artist and designer named Kirill Rezin. A completely sane man, he revealed that he began attacking children due to a divorce. Quiet and intellectual, he lived with his mother and grandmother, who had no inkling of his dreadful hobby. For 14 episodes of his heinous crimes, the court sentenced him to 20 years in a maximum security colony. Detectives in Balakovo also suspected a serial thief of having maniacal tendencies. This thief only targeted elderly women, and it was crucial to quickly determine whether he was merely a robber or truly a maniac. Panic would ensue if someone died at the hands of this thief. Balakovo's Lenin Street is the city's main thoroughfare. Since the Perestroika era, nothing much has changed there. The central square is paved with Soviet-era tiles, and a Lenin monument still stands in front of the administration building. Located 250 kilometers from Saratov, Balakovo, despite its many factories, is much cleaner and more family-friendly. It was on this central street that another attack on an elderly woman occurred. On October 19, 2011, Zoya Vasilyevna Petrova was supposed to babysit her granddaughter. Her daughter-in-law was going for a night shift, and Zoya had agreed to help. The day before, another elderly woman was attacked nearby. On her way to her daughter-in-law's place, Zoya decided to stop at the store for groceries. She had only 500 rubles in her wallet. As usual, she entered the building, took the elevator to the 6th floor, and fumbled for her keys at the door. Suddenly, someone grabbed her from behind and threw her forcefully down the stairs. The severe blow to her head almost caused her to lose consciousness. Her vision darkened and blood appeared on her forehead. She couldn't even make out the assailant's silhouette, let alone his face. She was too terrified to move. The man quickly snatched her bag and, at the last moment, ripped the gold earrings from her ears. As the thief fled the building, an elderly woman sitting on a bench in the yard noticed him. She saw a woman's purse protruding from under his jacket. She provided a detailed description of the fleeing suspect. Comparing the testimonies of the other 6 victims, the detectives finally managed to create a composite sketch of the serial thief. One leading theory was that since the attacker used a knife against women, he was physically weak and lacked confidence in his strength. The sketch was immediately distributed to all police departments, and unexpectedly, it was discovered that the mobile phones stolen from previous victims were still active. The thief was meticulous, taking only personal items and small amounts of cash, avoiding anything of significant value. Could it be that he had made a mistake this time? The phones were traced through billing records and found in the construction pit of a house being built about half a kilometer from the crime scenes. The mysterious thief was either masterfully covering his tracks or wasn't motivated by profit. But the detectives had their own theory. The strange behavior described by all the victims could be due to regular drug use, indicating he might be in withdrawal. Such a person was highly dangerous, capable of killing for a dose. Swift action was required. The police began checking individuals across the city who had previous convictions involving knife crimes. However, there wasn't anyone matching the suspect's description in the criminal databases or the local precinct records. Meanwhile, detectives interviewed pawn shop workers and buyers. The thief had taken golden earrings from the most recent victim and would likely try to sell them. One pawn shop employee reported that a man had indeed come in and attempted to sell gold items. He was a middle-aged man who looked sickly and extremely nervous. At the last moment, sensing something was wrong, he abruptly left. She also mentioned seeing him frequently in one of Balakovo's districts. After surveillance was established behind the pawn shop, the criminal never showed up. Acting on a tip-off from the pawn shop, police meticulously checked all registered apartments and raided known drug dens. One day, an informant told the officers about a man fitting the suspect's description frequenting one of these dens. During the raid, stolen items belonging to the victims were found. There was no doubt they had found their man. The plan was to wait and hope the suspect would return for his next fix before committing another attack. A few days later, Sergei Korofanov, a long-term addict, was apprehended. A quiet, withdrawn man, Korofanov bore little resemblance to the stereotypical serial killer. He obediently answered the investigators' questions, detailing how he almost killed 7 people. It seemed absurd, but these women had narrowly escaped death for almost nothing. Most often, their wallets contained just a couple of hundred rubles. As it turned out, Sergei Korofanov had a long criminal record. His photo was even in the criminal investigation files, but his appearance had changed drastically due to years of drug abuse. His daily dose reached up to 8 cubes of desomorphine, leading to conflicting witness descriptions. Some described him as a gray-haired man over 40, while others insisted he was a blonde young guy. Korofanov targeted elderly women, not because they might have large amounts of cash, but because they were weaker. To prevent resistance, he immediately stabbed his victims. The most astonishing part was that Korofanov decided to fund his drug habit by taking lives without any regret, even during interrogation. He came from an affluent family with wealthy parents and a higher-than-average standard of living. Despite cooperating with the investigation, the Balakovo court sentenced Korofanov to 15 years in a high-security prison. After the verdict, Korofanov retracted his statements and wrote a letter to the local newspaper from the detention center. His letter read more like a cry for help than a simple request. "My letter is more of a cry for help than a mere plea. I'm currently in a detention facility in Saratov. In October, crimes were committed in Balakovo, where women were attacked with knives, and I was convicted for them. Besides my robberies, the investigation charged me with 2 additional episodes I did not commit. I made an unofficial deal with the officers who promised I would get no more than 8 years. However, in court, things turned out differently, and I was sentenced to 15 years by combining the penalties. I was deceived by the investigator and the operative worker, who legally didn't have the authority to make such a deal. The crimes I didn't commit brought significant public attention. In court, I described other crimes based on the operative's words. There is no evidence of my guilt in those cases. Still, what's done is done. I ask you to conduct a journalistic investigation. Were there similar crimes sharing characteristics and methods after October 20th, 2011 when I was detained? The arbitrariness of the officers and their unwillingness to work are striking. This could happen to anyone. Respectfully, Sergei Anatolievich Korofanov. In the end, the verdict remained unchanged, but that's another story altogether. To ensure you don't miss new stories, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave your comments. Your feedback is very important to me.